So about 30 years ago, my dad got a new computer. Now, if you remember back in the early 90s, when the first kind of modern computers came out with graphic interfaces and you didn't have to be writing code all the time. But what he was particularly excited about was that this new computer came with card games on it. And so he could waste many hours when he should have been working by playing solitaire. But I remember this one day when he was gradually digging through everything that was on this computer, and he found this new card game which he'd never heard of before. It's a game called Hearts. Some of you may be familiar with it. Now, he obviously had no time to read the instructions, so he thought, I'll just play. You know, surely every game's the same, really? And as he started playing this game, he realized he was getting the most points. He thought, this is brilliant. I must be a genius. You know, this is such an easy game. And he played multiple hands of this card game on the computer until he got to the end and he realized that he lost. He was a bit confused, so he played it again, and the same thing happened. He got all the points, and it said that he lost again. And it was only eventually he sat down and read the instructions to this game, and he realized that it's actually kind of the opposite to every other card game. You win by losing. So whoever has the least number of points at the end of the game wins. Now, as much as that's a strange analogy, I think in some sense, this is the story of your life. You are born into a world, and it's almost like you emerge in the middle of a game. And you're looking around trying to work out, what is this game we're playing? How do you win? And we quickly get taught that you win by being the first, being the best, having the most. And we assume that that's how life works. But what I want to suggest to you, and what the gospel says today, is that life is actually a bit like that card game. It's the complete opposite. Whoever ends up with the most ends up losing. And whoever ends up with the least actually wins. Now, to try and explain the gospel, Jesus is walking along with the disciples and he asks them, who do you say that I am? Now, Peter understands. He says, you're the Messiah. You're the Son of God. And Jesus says, that's correct. Now, at this point, there's like this revelation moment for the disciples because, like all of us, we're in this game and we're confused. We don't quite know what the meaning of it is, how you win. But they suddenly realize, if you're the Messiah, you're the guy who created the game. You wrote the rules. And so suddenly we've hit the jackpot. Because with you, we're now going to become successful. We're going to win. And obviously winning means lots of money, lots of success, lots of power. And so you can see these thought bubbles going off in the disciples. And they're like, we've just won, okay? He's going to show us how to become the best ever. And just as they've realized this moment, Jesus then says, okay, I'm going to show you how to win. And as he says, the Son of Man is destined to suffer grievously, to be rejected by the elders, the chief priests and the scribes, to be put to death, and then after 3 days he will rise again. So in some sense, Jesus just said, okay, the way that we're going to win here is by dying, by failing, by losing absolutely everything. And you can understand why Peter reacts to this. He's like, whoa, no. I don't think we're playing the same game here. But this is the moment of revelation. Jesus says, this is what life is. I've just opened up the secret for you. The more you give, the more you lose, that's when you actually win. This is the secret of Christianity. And this is the secret that most Christians never actually understand. Most of us have turned Christianity into what we want it to be. And we've turned it into something which looks like every other religion. Be good, behave, say your prayers, get to heaven. And in between, you would just act like everybody else. But what Jesus is actually saying here is something radically different. He's saying it's about pouring out your life. It's about losing everything in love for other people. Rather than gaining and accumulating wealth and time and energy, it's about pouring out everything you've got until the last drop. And then you win. Now, if you look down through the history of the church, we have got these absolutely insane, mad people that we venerate in the church. We call them saints. Okay? And I don't know whether you ever pay attention to this, but we venerate and celebrate these saints, and yet we would never ever want to imitate them. Because the lives they lived were complete, utter madness. You take someone like St. Francis of Assisi. Everyone loves St. Francis. You know, he's celebrated for loving creation and loving animals, but that's not actually really his story. The real essence of his story was that he was a rich young man from a family that was not really wealthy, but they were pretty comfortable. He was popular, successful, he had the whole world at his feet, until one day he heard the gospel and he realized how you win the game. And he decided to take this huge leap of faith and actually try to play to see if it worked. And so he gave away all of his money. He was walking down the road one day and he met a beggar and he swapped his clothing, gave him the beautiful fine silk clothes and took the garment of the beggar. And Francis ended up, like for the rest of his life, he was trying to give everything. Every ounce of energy, every bit of love, every bit of money he ever came across, give it away. And he ended up finding freedom and joy and peace in such an abundance that people were flocking to him, trying to follow him. That takes an enormous act of faith. And this is, I think, where the second reading, where St. James is talking about what it actually means to be a Christian. It's not enough to simply believe in God. It's about believing in him enough that you're prepared to take that reckless step of faith. God comes and reveals the meaning of life as the complete inversion of everything we know and understand. And he says, do you believe me enough to actually follow this? To pour your life out recklessly? That is what it means to believe God. To say, Lord, I believe in your resurrection so much that I'm prepared to sacrifice my life here on earth. You know, we live in a world where it's all about accumulating and looking after yourself. You know, and even I think particularly with this younger generation now, where there is such a thing of like, don't get married, don't have kids, just live for yourself, just completely protect yourself at every moment. And yet what we're seeing is a generation who are so unhappy. We need to rediscover this secret of life. We need to realize that when Jesus goes to the cross, he's actually opening up a doorway to hope for us. What would it mean to actually believe in him enough to say, Lord, my life is not my own. My life is now given for everybody else. If I can use one final analogy, if you think of like a treasurer of a country or the financial officer of a business, they are given an enormous amount of money and their job is to give it away. A really good treasurer is someone who keeps nothing for themselves. It comes into their hands, they pass it on. Now, a really good treasurer like that is going to get a huge bonus at the end of the year. Okay, you've got to respect the fact that they have kept nothing for themselves. And so we're going to say, okay, you've done your job well. Whereas someone in that role who decides to say, well, you know what? I'm not quite sure whether I'm going to get paid next week, so I'll just keep a bit to myself. That's what we call embezzlement, corruption. Now, if you think of that like your life, okay, God has given you a gift. But he's basically saying this life doesn't belong to you. You're a treasurer of these gifts for the sake of blessing others. And so what passes through your hands needs to be passed on to others. Now, whether that is the number of years that you live, the amount of energy or health you have, the amount of money you have, it's that idea that my job is to bless other people with this. And the more that I trust that God's going to provide for me, if He's going to provide for me, I don't need to be stealing what's been passed through my hands. But if I don't trust that God's going to provide, if I don't really believe the gift of eternal life, I'm going to start taking. I'm going to say, well, you know what, 90% of this is mine, or 98%. I'm going to spend all my life caring for myself, just making my life more comfortable. And we fail. You know, we have not done our job here on earth. As Jesus says, the more you give, the more you receive. He's basically saying if you are a trustworthy treasurer or financial officer, you're going to be entrusted with more. If you spend your life for the sake of caring for His people, He'll give you what you need. Those who lose their life will save it, whereas those who try to save their life will lose it. So we've got to discover the mystery of this paradox, because right there is the whole secret of what a good life is.